Here on Democracy Now!, I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, as Special Counsel Robert Mueller continues his probe into Russian meddling into the 2016 election, we take a look back at Washington's record of meddling in elections across the globe. By one count, the United States has interfered in more than 80 foreign elections between 1946 and 2000. And that doesn't count U.S.-backed coups and invasions. Former CIA Director James Woolsey recently joked about the U.S. record of meddling overseas during an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that now, though? We don't mess around in other people's elections, Jim?
Only for a very good cause.
Can you do that? Do a Vine video on a former CIA director.
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
All right, thank you.
The list of countries where the U.S. has interfered is long. In 1893, the U.S. helped overthrow the Kingdom of Hawaii. 5 years later, in 1898, the U.S. invaded and occupied Cuba and Puerto Rico. A year later, it was the Philippines. Early 20th century interventions included Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, all in the 1910s.
In 1953, the U.S. helped overthrow the Iranian government. A year later, in 1954, the U.S.-backed coup in Guatemala, overthrowing the democratically elected leader of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz. Then in the 60s, the list grew to include, once again, the Dominican Republic, Indonesia, and the Congo. And that's just a partial list. Even with the end of the Cold War, U.S. interference overseas did not end. Next week marks the 15th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq to topple the government of Saddam Hussein. We now go to Stephen Kinzer, former New York Times foreign correspondent who writes about world affairs for the Boston Globe. He's the author of a number of books, including Overthrow, America's Century of Regime Change from Hawaii to Iraq, All the Shah's Men, An American Coup and the Roots of Middle East Terror. He's written the book Bitter Fruit about the coup in Guatemala. And his latest book is The True Flag, Theodore Roosevelt, Mark Twain, and the Birth of American Empire. Stephen Kinzer, we welcome you back to Democracy Now! To talk, sadly, about the very same issue. I'm not quite sure where to begin, whether to go back to the beginning, but let's start since it was 65 years ago. In Iran, in 1953, in March of 1953, the U.S. was in full swing making plans for overthrowing the government of the democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. Can you talk about what the U.S. did in Iran then, so well known throughout Iran, but most people in this country have no idea?
Early in the 20th century, the people of Iran began moving towards democracy. It was a very difficult struggle. It was back and forth. But finally, after the Second World War, democracy did emerge in Iran. It was the one parenthesis, the one period of real democracy that we've had in Iran over the last 100 years. So the problem came when the Iranians chose the wrong leader. They did something that the United States never likes. They chose a leader who wanted to put the interests of his own country ahead of the interests of the United States. And that alarmed the West, and particularly the United States. Mossadegh's first move was to nationalize Iranian oil. We thought this would be a terrible example for the rest of the world. We didn't want to start this process going in other countries. So in order to set an example, the United States decided we would work with the British to overthrow the elected democratic government of Iran. We sent a senior CIA officer who worked in the basement of the American embassy in Iran, organizing the coup. The coup finally succeeded in the summer of 1953. Mossadegh was overthrown, and more important, the democratic system in Iran was destroyed forever. This was not just an attack on one